It looks like to me that the U.S. is a planned economy. It looks like the Fed is the one calling the shots.
What?
Now,
That's an extreme characterization.
So the reason that we bring this up is because this is a Bitcoin show, and Bitcoin, in my opinion, and I'm sure everyone else's opinion here, everyone's a little bit biased. Bitcoin is a better alternative to central planning. You see that Freudian slip there. All right, so we have a very smart person on today, and I picked this subject to talk about it with P. So I'm going to read a little bit about the article. If you've been subscribed to this channel, this is something that we've been covering for the last couple of months. So the name of the article in the Wall Street Journal is called "The Fed Pricked the Everything Bubble." I'm just going to read a little bit of it. Some investors pray to their God for financial success. That's a very interesting way to start the article. For the rest of us, there's the Federal Reserve. After more than a decade in which the Fed giveth, it hath taken away. The markets quite rightly fear that Jerome Powell is in a smiting mood. Interesting vocabulary. Monday brought the definitive evidence that the everything bubble is deflating, although it is better understood as the expected result of cheap money and low inflation rather than a true bubble. The S&P 500 finally closed more than 20% below its January high, the standard definition of a bear market, although on an intraday basis it was briefly there in May. The most extreme speculative stocks led the way down, but even assets that haven't so far fallen much, such as housing, are highly likely to follow suit. One way to think about it, the Fed is increasing the yield on the dollar, pushing up its value against everything. The gain against the yen is easily understood as the Fed tightening while the Bank of Japan stays easy. The gain in the dollar against Amazon stock shows up as a falling share price rather than exchange rate. It isn't just that investors are collateral damage in a campaign against inflation. Falling share, bond, and other asset prices are actively helpful to the Fed. They make people poorer, encouraging them to save more and spend less. This is the opposite of the so-called wealth effect the Fed relied on to boost inflation during the past dozen years. The policy of super low interest rates and trillions of dollars of bond purchases created the everything bubble, with prices of virtually every U.S. asset hitting new highs. As the Fed reverses course, so the everything bubble is going away. Now, let's take a look at what they mean about reversing course. This is the Fed balance sheet. This is the justification of how the Fed prints money, right? The Fed issues bonds. There's no one in the world that has enough capital to buy those bonds, so the Fed buys it themselves and they put it on their balance sheet. This experiment really started in 2008, 2009, coincidentally, when Bitcoin was born. And fast forward, this is where we are today, and this is what they mean. They're starting to take assets off their balance sheet. Now look at the amount of pain that we've endured, and we really haven't moved much. And this is the M2 money supply, the amount of, supply, the amount of fiat. Also, a little bit, it kind of declined a little bit. Okay, so a couple questions to P, right? It looks like to me that the U.S. is a planned economy. It looks like the Fed is the one calling the shots.
What?
Now,
That's an extreme characterization.
So the reason that we bring this up is because this is a Bitcoin show, and Bitcoin, in my opinion, and I'm sure everyone else's opinion here, everyone's a little bit biased. Bitcoin is a better alternative to central planning. You see that Freudian slip there, to central banking. Did I fuck up? To central banking. So look, that article, I appreciate how sincere it was, and I appreciate the honesty, but it's revealing, right? It's like the Fed decides whether people are poor or not. You are the victim when the Fed is trying to fight inflation, even though they created inflation. And now something even troubling too is, it wasn't Bitcoin supposed to be a decoupled asset? Like, wasn't supposed to be uncorrelated? What's going on here? So a lot of questions to unpack here, right? Is this like, supposedly the whole thing about the Fed was to control inflation and to control unemployment. Are they really doing a good job on that? I don't know. There's just questions here, right? Could Bitcoin be a better alternative? We know Bitcoin's monetary policy, right? It halves every 4 years. So I don't know. I know it's a lot to unpack, but I think it's very important that we cover this, guys, because at the end of the day, right, Bitcoin is an alternative. That's what we're fighting for, right? That to end the tyranny of central banking. Central banking put us in this position today. It wasn't the pandemic that can't be named. It wasn't that. It was because governments purposely shut down the economy, right, to fight the pandemic. You could say that was a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not going to get into that. But at the same time, what really happened is that they used that as a justification to print a record amount of money, which we were covering for so long. And don't forget, they gaslit you the entire freaking time, and they told you there wasn't inflation. It's transitory. It's the supply chains.
I really doubt that we're going to see an inflationary cycle.
Most economic analysts believe that it will have a temporary or transitory impact.
The faster than expected increase in some of those prices is actually a good sign.
The overwhelming consensus is going to pop up a little bit and then go back down. No one's talking about this great,
This is something that will settle down.
Transitory.
And the data shows that most of the price increases we've seen were expected and are expected to be temporary. There's nobody suggesting there's unchecked inflation on the way. It's highly unlikely that's going to be long-term inflation that's going to get out of hand. I don't know anybody who's worried about inflation.
Over the last couple of months, we actually saw it trended downward.
But they never talked about, and that's the signal, they never talked about the record amount of money printing. Don't believe me? I'm going to put up the M2 chart again.
Exactly.
This goes back to...
change the metric.
This was back to 1959. And look at that. At 2020, it literally pulled an Elon Musk rocket and went straight up into the air. So, I don't know,
hold
man.
on.
Yeah.
You were just showing the M2SL, which is the new metric they created, which reports lower fucking numbers than the original M2 money supply. And they're just like, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, this metric we've been using for years, it don't trip dog, but it doesn't work anymore because it shows the number being too high. So we're gonna make another one that's lower. Just use this one instead. Classic tactic. We see the same thing with the CPI. The CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index. The specific basket of goods that it represents are rotated out. Now, some of those rotations make sense. It's supposed to represent what people are actually buying and using and eating and needing, but a lot of them don't make any fucking sense, and they are clearly designed to change the frame that we all use, or that we are supposed to use, to understand whether inflation is or is not happening. And that's just, if you don't like what the data is showing, change the frame. I agree. You said a comment a second ago that I thought was very astute, which is the entire, I don't reuse the word frame, but the entire frame of that article you just read is the Fed is here to make these decisions, and we are but humble peons praying at the altar of Jerome Powell and Yellen and Christine Lagarde and notorious fat man Augustus Carson's. Please, help us. How can you make these decisions? And I just find such an issue with that way of looking at the world. And it goes back to the other thing you said, which is we should not be relying on these centralized systems to allow us to survive based on this most essential asset, which is value. And it is crazy to me that we live in a world where these types of articles and the types of statements and the types of beliefs that people have around what is reasonable and fair and just when it comes to central banking, it's crazy to me that we live in a world where the actions that are being taken are viewed as just, is what I'm trying to say. I agree. You asked the question, is Bitcoin a better answer? And the answer is, of course, abso-fucking-lutely, right? Sorry for the background noise. Bitcoin is a system that allows us to free ourselves from this central bank-controlled apartheid, financial apartheid, which is extremely important. And that can be uncomfortable. That can be scary because it means looking in the mirror and asking yourself, oh shit, am I responsible for my own financial destiny? Am I responsible for that? And a lot of people will be they'll even start to ask the question, and they're like, no, I don't want to see myself. And then they just sort of want to suckle harder at the teat of, Jerome Powell. He has about 100 nipples that go straight down the middle of his chest, and everyone that reports to him suckles on them on a daily basis. But yeah, man, I think Bitcoin is the answer.
I agree, man. I really do think Bitcoin's the answer. Phil, you want to chime in on that before we get to the next part?
Absolutely. So look, we saw what happened the last time that they started to quote unquote slow the money printing and raise interest rates. That chart that you showed, one of the charts that you showed, just shows an instant dip. It doesn't take very long for the market to react, number one. But that's irrelevant to Bitcoin. The other piece that I wanted to touch on, though, is about Bitcoin being the better asset. So right now, Bitcoin is still emerging. That's the way I see it. Bitcoin is still very early stages, right? It's not just me that sees it this way. Many people significantly more intelligent, more learned than I am, see it this way as well. And as an emerging asset, we're going to have a bumpy road. This is what happens. This is what happens with any type of adoption in any type of grassroots movement. It just so happens that Bitcoin is money. So, and free speech, language, all this wonderful stuff. So it makes it even more complex. So why do we not have a decoupling as Bitcoin is emerging? I believe that it's because right now it is still in those very early stages, and the majority of people, not necessarily us, but the majority of people that are out there that are looking at Bitcoin or are quote unquote holding Bitcoin in some form or other, we're not talking about necessarily us that hold our own keys. I'm talking about the people that hold paper Bitcoin and stuff like that. They, for the most part, I believe, are treating it as a standard, just an asset like another asset that just has somewhat different qualities. So I do believe that we will eventually experience the quote unquote great decoupling. I just don't think that we're going to see it right away. I think that maybe we're like 2 years out, maybe 4 years out, maybe the next halving. I mean, look, I'm in no way, I have no creds, right? This is just me looking at Bitcoin every single day and, just thinking through these narratives over and over again. And that's my reasoning behind it. So I think we're in a great place. I do think that Bitcoin is the answer. The current market environment just maybe doesn't look like that. So if we're cherry picking a timeline, it may not look like that at the moment. We zoom out and we can see it, or at least I can see it. I know you guys can see it. So
I can't.
It's enough for me.
I can't see it.
That's
Anyways,
not true. Of course you could see it.
I'm just messing with you.